Today I'll be presenting the sociocultural perspectives on learning and the zone of proximal development for my Web 2.0 project. My name is Sanchez-Clark and this is for my Education 518 class under Professor Danny Kim. According to Steiner and Mann, Vygotsky's ideas on the sociocultural perspectives on learning defines learning as a dynamic interdependence of social and individual processes. Furthermore, Vygotsky differentiated his ideas from behaviorist perspectives of utilizing internal and external dichotomy by conceptualizing development as a transformation of socially shared activities into internalized processes. Steiner and Mann believed that there are three major themes involved in Vygotsky's concept. These are individual development, human action on both the social and individual levels, and lastly, that the first two themes should be examined or analyzed through genetic and/or developmental analysis. In essence, sociocultural approaches to learning and development is based on the concept that human activities take place in cultural contexts and are mediated by language and other symbol systems. This can best be understood when investigated in their historical context and/or development. The sociocultural perspectives on learning, as espoused by Vygotsky and as explained by Steiner and Mann, is critical in seeing and viewing current trends in the development of learning methodologies and approaches to teaching. In incorporating a more holistic view of how and what affects student learning and not dissecting the individual learner from his origins, language and culture, and other social influences outside and inside the school, a more comprehensive outlook on the student's learning needs can be perceived. The importance of Vygotsky's theory lay in taking into account the sociocultural perspectives that influences the student's learning. In emphasizing the impact of sociocultural factors in a student's learning and cognitive development, it rounded out and completed the other perspectives on learning and provided the missing link. One other strength in Vygotsky's concepts and theses on sociocultural theory is that it provided early insights for other researchers and theorists to expound and further study the effects and influences of sociocultural factors in a student's learning and cognitive development. In putting together a more holistic outlook on a student's learning influences, the concept of the zone of proximal development evolved. According to Ormrod, Vygotsky's theory also expounded on how a child's range of intellectual development could be maximized through collaboration with adults. She believed that if tasks and learning assignments are done cooperatively and in collaboration with teachers and/or parents, the child or student can accomplish more elaborate or complex tasks than if they do it on their own. On the other hand, one weakness of Vygotsky's sociocultural theory and cognitive development is that his research and its results were imprecise about age-specific characteristics in children. On video analysis of the first video entitled Investigating Crickets. In the video produced by WGBH Boston in 2000 entitled Investigating Crickets, a 9th grade biology class were shown conducting an experiment and observation using crickets. Several characteristics and facets of the sociocultural process of learning were immediately visible from the onset. The teacher was shown grouping the students in pairs and giving them detailed instructions and guidelines on formulating their own hypotheses. This action provided a venue for the students to interact with their peers. In another direct application of one of the basic themes of Vygotsky's premise on the zone of proximal development, the teacher went the rounds of each of the pairs of students on every step of the crickets experiment, providing direct adult guidance from hypothesis formulation to observation and finally on drawing conclusions. By doing so, the teacher allowed the students to not only add on their existing knowledge, but also risk going beyond what they know. In one instance, the teacher had a pair of students redesign their hypotheses and experiment design because she felt the students were not digging enough so that their fullest potential for participation and learning wasn't being brought out by the exercise. This extra prodding is also a display of an adult optimizing learning from a child or a student. The teacher also gave the students ample time, making the time frame for the class project flexible enough depending on the progress of the students' learning and appreciation of the exercise. Through the careful and personalized guidance of the teacher, the students had learned and practiced firsthand the identification and formulation of hypotheses, variables, how to form observations, and derive a conclusion from their observations. The teacher prevented one of the weaknesses of the sociocultural theory from manifesting in this class because she made sure that she went through each and every pair of students in all steps of the experimentation process. She pushed them to their limits, but at the same time did not allow them to have a false start. Her close guidance and supervision at all times of the paired young scientist made for a successful class activity. Analysis of the second video, entitled Conjectures Through Graphing. Like the first video, Mr. Cabana, the teacher in the video Conjectures Through Graphing, teamed up several students to go through the process of computing a complex math problem. He also utilized Vygostky's concept of zone of proximal development by providing them an opportunity to work through a complicated task with the help of their classmates and by providing each group personalized monitoring and guidance. He also gave them subtle hints to guide them in the right direction. Mr. Cabana also provided two forms of scaffolding as shown in the video. One is when he provided guidance to each of the teams formed to solve the math problem, and the second time by each of the team providing their own precious knowledge in attacking the problem at hand. Each student provided their contribution and reflected on the problem based on previous knowledge, and then explored possibilities and opened themselves up for the suggestions from other members of the group. As one of the students said during an interview, "More heads are better than one." Acknowledging contributions from outside sources are important to knowledge formation. Lesson redesign. At first glance, I thought the way the lesson as presented by the 9th grade teacher was close to perfect. After further review, I did notice two things that could be improved upon on the lesson design. First, although the principles of experimentation was made clear to the students, when she prompted for a review of previous lessons on how living organisms behave, function, and survive, she immediately brought out a transparency for them to review. If I were the teacher, I would have seized this opportunity to assess what they remembered from the previous lessons. It would have utilized all three previously discussed methods of learning, which are as follows: the behaviorist theory, the constructivist process of learning, and third, Vygostky's zone of proximal development. First, the behaviorist theory would have served as additional stimulus for the forthcoming cricket experiment. Secondly, by allowing the students to reflect back on what they knew, it would have been an exercise of the constructivist theory in that the students would be allowed on their own to identify what they already knew and build on it. I believe that by allowing the students to recall on their own by asking for volunteers to review previous knowledge, it would have allowed not only for a quick review, but also serve as a diagnostic measurement of the class's knowledge of how living organisms behave and function. On the second video, it showed Mr. Cabana's handling of his math class. I would not redesign anything at all. All three perspectives of learning were utilized. First, the complex math problem and the group work provided a stimulus for the students to get going. Secondly, either knowingly or unknowingly, the students demonstrated facets of the constructivist theory by discussing the problems among themselves and building on what they previously knew. From there, Mr. Cabana provided Vygostky's most prominent theme in his sociocultural perspective on learning and development, in that of providing adult guidance and maximizing the students' potential for learning by giving them a much more complex math problem to solve as a group and by giving them subtle hints to point them towards the right direction. Conclusion. The two videos utilized were good examples to elucidate on the merits of the sociocultural learning theory. First, it showed both teachers had clearly defined objectives at the very start of the experiment process and the math problem-solving exercise. Second, both teachers allowed the students to undergo the process of experimentation and problem-solving, utilizing a peer partner or partners, and collaborate on their observations and thoughts about how to go about with the experiment or math problem. This allowed for one of the more important facets of the sociocultural learning theory to work, that of building knowledge from what you previously knew and gathering information from what other people knew, as in this case, their peers. Third, both teachers were careful in monitoring and assessing the progress of every group of students to provide guidance and the necessary scaffolding for them to be successful in the learning activity. By skillfully navigating each pair and prompting them for responses, they ensured that all of the students were on the correct path.